What's going on, Steelers Nation? Welcome back to the channel. It is Friday. Hopefully, you guys had a productive week, a good week nonetheless. We've also reached the conclusion of Steelers voluntary OTAs. So, kind of about to dive into a really dead period for like the NFL calendar. So, I wanted to jump on here just really quick to give some final thoughts on just some of the stuff that's happened in recent days, answer any questions that you guys may have in the chat and all that good stuff. But just before we get started, y'all know the drill, man. If y'all could just do me a favor, make sure that you like the video, subscribe to the channel, drop me a comment. All that stuff is greatly appreciated on my end. Really, I think the some of the stuff that we didn't go over last time, I think James Daniels. I don't know if we talked about that or not, but I do want to continue to touch on that a little bit. The Steelers have came out and they've had discussions with him about they're not going to enter into contract negotiations with James. And I think that's a tricky situation, right? Because I've been pretty vocal about he would be a guy that I'd really want to keep around. He's still entering the prime of his career. He's going to be in a system that I think really fits his skill set really well. So I'm excited to see what he's going to do in 2024. But having said that, I think I do kind of understand where the Steelers are coming from, on multiple different kind of levels, right? Like, the Steelers are, they're about to open up a new system. I think that they're right to potentially want to see kind of how things play out. And the guard market just absolutely exploded on them right before, they had the chance to enter those negotiations. Now, my counter to that would be that I'd like to see the Steelers be a little bit more proactive in these type of situations. A lot of these negotiations don't typically start until, around OTAs, training camp. Like we've seen stuff like linger into later in the offseason. Which they got their focus on other things earlier in the offseason with the draft and such. But when you wait after the free agency period passes to do these extensions, you run the risk of this stuff happening where the market kind of takes off a little bit. You look at the contract that Robert Hunt just signed with Carolina. I think that was a little bit of an overpay, but you look at it, it's 20 million per year. I mean, that's just 44 million guaranteed. That's a ton for a guard, probably a similar caliber player as James Daniels. So, on one end of the spectrum, I do wish they've been a little more proactive, but at the same time, like I can understand maybe not wanting to invest that type of money in a good player, but maybe not somebody that is necessarily a team changing or a top five player at this position, even though I think James is probably in that discussion in terms of being a top 10 guard, especially right guard in the NFL. But he's gonna be looking at a significant raise, man. He's gonna be entering free agency potentially next year at 27, 28 years old. His last deal was I think a little over 8 million per year. He's gonna get a raise on top of that as long as he stays. I mean, even if he doesn't stay healthy, I feel like. But there's a lot of money to be made, and I think there's some advantages there too. Anytime you can get a player that's motivated to make some money on the open market, we've seen players have really huge contract years, and I think Daniels could definitely be in for one of those campaigns. So, Ray, appreciate you guys jumping in with me. If you guys do have questions, anything like that, drop them in the chat. I appreciate it. I'll definitely try to get to as many as I can. Gonna probably make this thing last about 30 minutes or so. Probably won't stream for very much longer than that today. Just been incredibly busy on my end, but I'll get to whatever you guys want to talk about. We can take this thing in a bunch of different directions. So, um, talk about Cam Heyward a little bit. He showed up to OTAs, which like the biggest thing for me is, him showing up to OTAs because he felt like he should be here. I think that shows that he's probably going to be here for mandatory minicamp, later this month. And then I think we can probably expect him here at training camp as well. He did say that his arrival, wasn't necessarily indicative that, him and the Steelers are getting closer on a new contract. They've been in negotiations. Cam wants a new deal. Understandably so. He's entering the last year of his deal. He wants some financial security. Like I said, before, we talked about it a little bit on previous live streams, previous videos. I think it's a difficult conversation just because of Cam's age, figuring out, what his production was like last year, what was based on the injury, what was based on maybe Father Time catching up. Is it a combination? What percentage of both of those really matter? But he even pointed out he still feels like he's a top five player at the position, and I think it's good to hear players say that because you want guys that still think that they can do it at a high level. Now, I think, the big thing for me is, what is the number that can keep everybody happy? And I don't know what that number is. Like I've been searching for kind of potential contracts to judge this off of, man. But like, there's just not a lot of defensive linemen that end up playing into, their late 30s at a really high level. I mean, if you look at it, Calais Campbell might be the best example. Calais a little bit different of a player. He's played some freaking edge. I think really last year for the Falcons, he pretty much played edge on early downs. But his deals, like if you look at the percentage of the cap that he's taken up over the past several seasons, I think even his last year with the Ravens was a $13 million cap hit. Then um, that was second to last year. 2022 with the Ravens, 3.5 million. And then he signed a deal with Atlanta for a 7.5 million cap hit. And I think if you look at the percentage of the cap, those are all 7% and below. Cam right now is over that 8% moniker. Now, that's where I think things get tricky is, can you give him a short extension that protects the franchise in terms of, I don't think giving a ton of guaranteed money to somebody that age is necessarily smart, but, you know, I've been pretty vocal about the fact that the Steelers do need him, not just because of what's behind him, but he's still a very valuable run defender, still strong as an ox, and I think you see that reflected in some of like the on-off splits in terms of how much better they were in stopping the run when he was on the field, even though he wasn't, in my opinion, 100% last year. So, I think that's definitely something to talk about. I mean, I would think, man, it's so tough. I can't see Cam playing in another uniform. I just really can't. I understand, to me, I've been pretty, clear about the fact that I would probably just play it out this year and just see where things go in the offseason. If Cam were to come back like super, super strong, I'd have no problem giving him another deal. But I just think the extension thing is going to be difficult to figure out. I mean, some people seem to be optimistic that it will get done before camp or before the preseason starts. We'll see. I don't know. We'll definitely have to look at that. Daniel, what's good, man? Appreciate y'all tapping in with me. See some other people showing up in the chat as well. So I think we probably just go ahead and need to, address the elephant in the room, which is, Cam Sutton, him getting re-signed. I mean, I kind of put out a lengthy tweet on Twitter/X. I guess what was that, yesterday, the day before, to talk just about my thoughts on the whole process and how all that stuff played out. I mean, I think from a football standpoint, right? Like it's a no brainer. Like getting a cornerback that's familiar with the system, still I think has years left in terms of his body holding up. For the veteran minimum contract, I mean, it's a no brainer, right? Like it makes too much sense on a lot of levels. He knows the defense. He's played outside. He's played some slot. He's from a coverage standpoint, I think that he's highly, highly intelligent. He's got experience defending different body types. Early in his career, they would sometimes bring him in to defend tight ends, sometimes be the quote unquote linebacker. They've also used him in some versatile ways in terms of using him as a safety in some of their NTT, some Tampa 2 stuff, and also like with their cover 3 variations. Like he's really comfortable doing a little bit of everything. So you can kind of probably use him in a similar role that, Patrick Peterson held last year. I think that Cam's got that. He's probably got that in him. And also like his best ball, really came out on the boundary. Like if you look at the numbers from, the year that he got paid, his final year in Pittsburgh, 2022, he was incredible, man. Like just some of the numbers, I pulled some of the numbers last night and was just like tweeting them out. The numbers were really good. I mean, I think that kind of reflects right in the contract that Detroit gave him. They thought he was a borderline, number one cornerback, and I don't necessarily think that was the case, but I do think that he deserved to be paid like a CB2 at the very minimum. And then anytime a player hits the open market, it's going to be a little bit of a tax. But if you look at the numbers in 2022, 58.1 passer rating allowed, 0.6 yards per cover snap. I mean, it's pretty good, man. Like that, those are strong numbers. And even like when you split that out from boundary to the slot, on the boundary, like 52.1 passer rating, zero point 0.5 yards per cover snap. And then in the slot, that was 70.8 passer rating and 0.8 yards per cover snap. I mean, those are strong numbers. So I think, the thing that I like about it from that perspective is, it gives you a little bit of a fail safe too. Like the Steelers didn't do very much at corner this offseason. They let really three guys walk out the door, and Wallace, Peterson, and James Pierre. I know I was forgetting somebody. Um, and they didn't really make a lot of moves to, remedy that. They, traded for Dante Jackson, but they subsequently, cut his cap hit. He took a pay cut to stay here. He was somebody that was going to get released in Carolina. Didn't draft a corner. Depending on what Ryan Watts ends up being, but he was, 6th-round pick or whatever. So, I think he gives them a little bit of a fail safe if Corey Trice or Darius Rush don't take, steps forward in training camp and preseason. And I think that's, smart to kind of, have somebody that could do a little bit. He's anytime you can do play on the inside and play on the outside, it does give you a little bit of a boost in my opinion. Now I think some of the other stuff that has to be talked about. I do think it's worth noting that he's coming off the worst season of his career. In Detroit, things didn't necessarily work out. Honestly, like I may go back and look at some of the Detroit film just to kind of see what was up. From my perspective, it looked like they were playing a lot of man coverage. And Aaron Glenn's, scheme, it seemed like they were being really overly dependent on his ability to play one-on-one on a boundary. And they do some blitz stuff too, so that's always going to put your corners in a little bit of a more high leverage situations. But I do think that, it's worth noting that he struggled last year. How much of that was the contract, living up to the expectations of that, a new system, a new scheme. I want to say that the scheme played a decent amount into that equation, but we will see. He's also like not the physical / like downhill player I feel like that the Steelers typically look for on early downs. Like you think about the guys that have played on first, second downs, like when you're expecting a higher percentage of runs, he hasn't been that type of player in the slot either. So that kind of gives me pause or questions about like, is he going to be a 3-down slot? Like, are they going to use him on first down? Are they going to use somebody else? Are we going to see some type of, are we going to use some type of, rotation? Like, I don't know what that looks like. But, just even when he was here, they really didn't want Cam playing a lot in the slot on early downs, just because like he's an okay tackler, but like he's not overly physical in terms of like playing the run and stuff. So I don't know how that's going to shake out. Think about the guys that have kind of manned that spot. Like, there's a specific archetype of player like the Hiltons, the Maulettes. Like if you can get somebody that can do both, like it's super, super valuable. That's why I love Brian Branch coming out of Bama a couple years ago. But it just they're hard to find. Usually you can either have a guy in there that can cover different body types, the shifty slot guys, or the big tall tight ends, but it's difficult to get somebody that's also, capable of playing the run at a high level. I don't think Cam is that. I think if he was, we'd be talking about a different caliber of player, but I do think that he can do it on passing downs. And, I still think that there's value in that because there was a big hole there. And then the obvious like black cloud of the situation, I'm going to preface this by saying like, this is just strictly my opinion and I'm going to give it. And then, I'm not going to tell you guys how to feel about the situation. I think the domestic violence charge, like based on what is public right now, is pretty disgusting. And I'm not going to go back and forth with people on it. And that's why this move isn't like necessarily one that I would have made, just because I just don't know that this is something that I would be comfortable with. Now, Cam met with the Steelers multiple times. I'm sure they have more info on the situation, or at least I would hope so, that they felt comfortable making this type of move. But, even despite me being, I mean, you could probably go back to my Twitter. I think I was actually like tweeting about Cam coming out of college in Tennessee. I was a huge fan. I thought that he was a really good fit for what they wanted to do. And I was an advocate, for drafting him, for playing him more in his early days. I was an advocate for re-signing him instead of letting him go to Detroit last year. I would have preferred that they use that money on Sutton instead of using it on Ogunjobi. All these takes aren't necessarily new for me. But even having said that, man, even though I think I appreciate or have appreciated his game more than most, I just wouldn't have signed him. It's not for me. But, clearly they thought differently. It is what it is. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on like the reasons why. It's just not something that I would have done. But again, you guys can feel like, don't come at me crazy. I've been seeing some of the other like channels like go crazy on people for having opinions. Like I said, man, y'all can feel however you want. I do. that's up to you guys. I'm not gonna get into no back and forth about that stuff. Whether you care about it, whether you don't, and if more information comes out about that whole ordeal, which is possible down the line, I feel great about going back and revisiting my stance or whatever. But um, that's just how I feel about it. So get that out the way. I think that covers most of the slot cornerback conversation. I'm trying to go back up and catch up on some of the comments. Nick and Big Al both said glaring hole at wide receiver on the afternoon drive. Thoughts? I mean, is anybody really surprised about that? I think, Nick and Allen been there every day, man. They know, and those guys know ball. I don't necessarily like. I'm not even going to front. I don't think I need to be there to know that there's a glaring hole at the wide receiver spot. I think all of you guys probably know that too. Um, but at the same time, man, like again, I think they're going to poke around and see what they can get on the trade market. But takes two to tango. Got to be some people willing to deal. But yeah, I've talked to Nick kind of off stream and stuff about how the different receivers look. Seems like Calvin's taking a nice step forward. He looks more comfortable. One thing that I know too is like Calvin's 100% healthy now with that dealing with that Liz Frank injury. His foot feels good. So I think the trust he has in his foot is going to allow him to, hopefully take a big step forward on the offense. Man, the opportunities there. Like I said, I don't particularly feel great about him potentially being like the number 2 or number 3 wide receiver. I would probably prefer to have him as like a 3 or 4 type option, but it's the situation that they're in, man. I really do. I think from a talent perspective, I think it's really him and Roman. I think that intrigued me the most. Even if I do acknowledge that both of those guys are going to have to take significant steps forward. Calvin's going to have to stay healthy. Going to really need to work on that snap down phase, prove that he can play outside at the NFL level. I know they've been playing him some more on the inside than what he played last year too. That's been something that he's told me over text. And then Roman, he's going to have to prove that he could be pressed, but. We'll see, man. We'll see. I still think that they're going to try to get a deal done. I just don't know if it's going to happen. My guy. What would Dan Moore get in a trade? That's a good question. I think a mid-round pick, something like that, like a 4th or something. That being said, though, like I know some people have talked about trading Dan Moore. It's not something that I would do, to be honest with you. I think having a swing tackle, granted he's on the final year of his rookie contract, having a swing tackle or just tackles in general with that much experience, well over 2,000 snaps. I want to say, he started over 40 games now. I think that having that off the bench is pretty valuable. Even if I do acknowledge too that they needed to upgrade over more skill set at the tackle position. Now, I don't think that he should necessarily be, locked into a starting spot or anything like that. I think you let Fautanu and those guys kind of battle it out. You see where the chips lay. They've been working Broderick Jones a lot at both sides. Fautanu's worked a little bit at both sides as well. Moore is still working on the left side. I kind of wrote about this for Steelers Now. I think last week we probably talked about it on the live stream, but I think really Moore's value could be kicked up, not just for the Steelers this year, but next year, if they can get him a little bit more comfortable on the right side. Just because like he's going to hit free agency. If he can only play one side, well, a lot of these teams, in free agency, they might need a right tackle. If you haven't proven that you can play right tackle, you've been adamant that you're uncomfortable there, which is the case. I mean, some guys can't do it, man. Like you look at Kevin Dodson, like that's the example that I kind of always go back to. Like he said straight up, even though like he worked at it for years in Pittsburgh, he just never felt comfortable on that side of the ball. And it just is what it is. Learning the inverse, it's you doing stuff backwards. So I'd keep him. I just because you always got the threat. You always got the threat of getting a comp pick for him, right? But I know that kind of gets a little tricky as well. But all right, let's see. I think this is a comment from Cody on Cam. I do agree, just in terms of like the leverage. I think everything's good. With the new CMC deal, seems like something has to give. Who you think's more likely getting? So here's my thing. I think they're gonna run it back. Like I don't know. It's TJ Hushmanzada who works out with Aiyuk. I think that he's maybe training him or something. Came out and said that Aiyuk would be willing to take that Amon-Ra St. Brown deal. like probably something close to that, what he just got from Detroit. And to full disclosure, like I love Amon Ra, man. Like I think he's a pretty special player in that regard. But I do think, just my belief, I do think that Aiyuk is a better player, just because of Amon Ra. I think that he has some outside ability, but I think Aiyuk can do both at a high level, and I just kind of value like those like X receiver types a little bit more than I do like the power slot archetype. Sorry, I can't talk. Um, but Amon Ra ended up getting 30 million a year, man. So I think it's like 75 total guarantees and then 35 fully guarantees. So is San Francisco going to be willing to give that out? I don't know. I mean, because they're already paying Debo, I think 23, 24 million a year. It just seems like to me, like all the moves that they've done, they drafted Ricky Pearsall in the first round, and then they drafted, I think it was Jacob Cowing, early day 3, and he's probably not a huge factor in this equation. But they also just gave Juan Jennings a brand new contract. So it just feels like they're maybe going to run it back with this kind of core one more time to see if they can get over the hump. I mean, this is a team that's, I think they got to the NFC Championship game maybe 2 years ago, and then they got to the Super Bowl last year. Like they're on the cusp of bringing that Lombardi home. They probably want to see if they can squeeze every little bit out of this that they can, and then next year, you kind of reevaluate whether it's Debo you want to keep, whether it's Aiyuk, what do you have the flexibility to do? It's gonna be different. It's gonna be different. Yeah, Calvin, for sure. I mean, the familiarity should make things like a pretty easy transition for sure. Debo won't get traded until Aiyuk under contract. Yeah, I mean, y'all know my thoughts. I mean, we've talked about we talked about Aiyuk quite a bit just over the offseason, man. I think that he would be somebody that I would rather have in a trade, even though, he's definitely going to cost more. But I do think he's more valuable. Just his skill set, I think it's more difficult to find, even though Debo is kind of a little bit of a unicorn. I just don't know. I prefer Aiyuk's skill set more than I do Debo's. And that's before you get into like the injury stuff. Debo always seems to be a little bit nicked up sometimes. So, but yeah, I mean, 2 pick swaps and a 2025. I don't even, where did this report come from, Chris? I don't even know what you're talking about, to be honest. I'm curious on that. Curious. Oh, let's see. Aaron. So we got about 60 of our closest friends and family in here. If y'all could, man, I'm gonna stream for about probably 10 more minutes or so. I'll answer the rest of your all's questions. And then I'm gonna hop off here because I got some stuff I gotta do. But if you guys could, if everybody could just go like the video for me real quick, that'd be fantastic. Definitely helps me out. Can Elliott play in the slot? He's a really good tackler. So Deshaun's played a little bit of everything. Like he's played in the slot, he's played in the box, like he's played some deep safety, like throughout different stops of his career, different years of his career. He's been asked to do a little bit more than the other. I think that that's kind of the intrigue with him, is that he is a guy who can do a little bit of everything. And then having that versatility on the back end is really nice. They've already got another one of those guys in Minka, definitely a different caliber of player. But yeah, Elliott's is a really nice piece, man. You mentioned the tackling. I mean, the last 2 years, 8.8 missed tackle percentage, 6.2 missed tackle percentage the year before in Detroit. I mean, those are really good numbers, man, for a safety. Anytime you're in the single digits for a DB, that's what you want to see. So definitely think that's worth noting for sure. What's good, man? What's good? Appreciate your take on it. Yeah, I mean, here's the deal. I thought about ignoring it altogether, but like, here's the deal. We're gonna have to talk about Cam. He's gonna play, and I still hope that the on-field stuff is what it is. I hope he succeeds, and like I said, I'm more than willing. I've had a bunch of takes I've had to walk back just because of lack of information. That's just part of this, man. Like, but as it stands here today, I wanted to get my thoughts out there. We don't have to dwell on it. I don't expect y'all to agree with me either. I don't need y'all to, but is what it is. Let's see. If Keanu Benton doesn't take his second year leap and Cam gets injured, yeah, but I feel pretty good about Keanu, man. I do. I mean, if you're a sub that was subbed last year during the regular season, like you all heard me continuously clamor for more Keanu Benton snaps. I think the big thing that I want to see is I want to see more pass rushing opportunities for Benton. Like I want to see them, play him more on third downs, like get him some more playing time and like the nickel over stuff that they're doing in sub package, and really cut him loose as a pass rusher. I just think he has more value. I think he has more upside than a guy like Ogunjobi does. And I also think that maybe the reduced snap count for Ogunjobi would be a good thing in terms of keeping him healthy, keeping him fresh. I mean, he's a really streaky player in general, but maybe if you can keep him, closer to 100%, I think that could be a good thing. But I think that I really do feel like Ben's going to take a step forward. Now, that being said, like we talk about all these guys, right? Like all these young players that we're talking about, they need potential leaps from. Development's not linear, and I think it's important to note that. Like, just because it's your second year in the league doesn't mean you're always going to play better than your first. I mean, that development path is, I would say, hopefully, it's the way that you want it to play out. But sometimes, there's peaks and flows. I mean, of everything, or peaks and valleys, I should say. But we'll see. I'm optimistic about Benton, man. And yeah, I mean, I think the defensive line depth in general is worth talking about in terms of a potential weakness, but I wouldn't say I don't think that's necessarily specific to the Steelers. I think that's probably a spot that a lot of playoff hopeful teams are in. If you can't, in general, like just with the percentage of the cap that Cam's contract's taking up, 8-9% or whatever it is, it's difficult. Like if he's on the bench, because he's hurt or whatever, like it's going to be hard to pick up the slack for that. And that's huge. Injuries are a huge part of, the NFL landscape, like how things play out, not just over the regular season, but in the postseason as well. So, but yeah, I mean, we're gonna need some guys on the pond to step up, and take some snaps. Um, Gotta hope a tackle goes down. I don't know, man. It's just for me, I would just probably keep him. Now, if you got more than that, like fourth round pick kind of barometer that I mentioned early, like, yeah, go ahead. I think David does make a good point though. Like with preseason, I mean, guys, unfortunately, the really ugly part of the preseason and ugly part of like training camp and stuff is like we see a lot of good players get hurt. Just in that phase, even without a ton of contact in those practices, injuries do occur. So like that's the other thing about trading some of your depth pieces. I think it sounds good on paper, being able to capitalize and turn that into draft capital of a player that you're not really planning on playing a ton this year, but you're always, in Dan Moore's case, whatever, you're one injury away from needing him to play significant snaps. And like tackle isn't a situation where it's, you're not talking about a third safety or something like that. This is a guy that's going to be on the field 100% of the time. Like you can't, I mean, I guess you can. Baltimore did it a little bit last year. You can't really rotate tackles in and out like you could kind of mix and match at like corner or something like that. Aiyuk absolutely destroyed the Steelers. Yeah, that's been my whole thing, man. Like I can't believe that there was when we first started talking about this thing, and I'm honestly kind of tired of talking about Aiyuk in general. So I haven't been talking about him a ton just over the past really since the draft. I don't even think I've tweeted about it or anything, but that's usually I feel like Steeler fans want players that they've like seen a lot of, and San Francisco's on TV all the time. And they just like Steeler fans just got a heads up first look in person of what he can do. Now, granted, they had Patrick Peterson on him for some of that game, and I don't think that worked out in the Steelers' favor. But Ike's a dog, man. Like I think a lot of people like fretting about like how much it would cost. They wouldn't care. It'd be about a couple weeks in. They'd be like, okay, I see why they did that. He's a beast. He's a beast. Came from a guy who was ex NFL GM. Hmm. I only asked that because that's not the trade. That's not the trade package that I've heard. So I'm not saying he's wrong and I'm right. I'm just saying that's not what I've heard. Steelers trade for Lamb. No, Dallas is not gonna trade him. But then again, like we talked about earlier with the James Daniels thing, how the Steelers kind of um they kind of drug their feet a little bit in terms of like getting ahead on an extension for him. Um, Dallas kind of a good example of like what I'm talking about. I feel like the best organizations right now from a financial business perspective are guys that are our teams that are consistently in front of these extensions, in terms of like paying your first round picks after 3 years. Like the Jalen Waddle deal is a good example. The Devontae Smith deal is a good example because you can get those guys for the market right now and they'll end up being values down the line. And you don't have to risk, stuff blowing up like like such as happened, because it's only gonna get more expensive. Like the thing is, like that's the thing about CD. Like Dallas could have easily signed CD Lamb to an extension last year, and it would have been cheaper than what they're gonna have to pay him now. So if we're talking like truly game changing type players, it's always better to sign them early. Always. Now, of course, you can say like, oh, there is risk taken on in terms of, in terms of injuries and things like that. Yeah, I mean that can happen anytime. It doesn't matter when you sign them. It's gonna be still my rebuttal to that thought process is like, it's not gonna be any safer to play football in 2024 than it was in 2020 or it will be in 2028. So if Peyton Wilson proves, yeah, I mean, I think for sure it'll end up being. I mean, it's gonna be an interesting conversation, right? Like, I do think that a lot of this depends on Cole Holcomb. Like, what does he look like when he gets back? When does he come back? I think he feels like he's close, but I don't know if that's actually the case or not. But I think a Landon's a lock. Patrick PQ is obviously a lock as well. I think Peyton Wilson's a lock. They spent a third round pick on him. Holcomb, has an interesting situation with his contract. They could kind of cut bait and get out of there. But yeah, I don't know. I do think 4 or 5 linebackers is going to be probably what they end up keeping. I mean, I've actually another interesting positional group to talk about that I've been talking a lot about is the tight end room. Like I think they're going to keep 4. I think 4 bare minimum tight ends are going to make the roster. I think potentially 5 though. You just look at what Arthur Smith has done in Atlanta the past couple of years. The guys they have on the roster. That's a position that's heavily important to the scheme. I could definitely see them keeping a 4th, 5th tight end. Especially because they've got some of these guys that I think are going to be asked to do more than one thing. Like I think they're going to try Connor Heyward, try Michael Pruitt, and move them around the formation. Maybe some pseudo fullback stuff because they don't necessarily have a true fullback on the roster. Maybe that is Pruitt. I don't know. We'll see. Aaron says Benton 42% of snap, Ogunjobi 68. Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Like I don't even think last year. To me, I already think that Benton's a better player. So, and I know that there's the idea that he's a rookie, you bring him on a little bit slowly. To an extent, I get it. I think that you can still ramp those snaps up towards the end of a player's rookie year without putting too much on their plate, especially when somebody is flashing the way that Benton was flashing last year. But that's my opinion. But we'll see. Hopefully, Ogunjobi plays better this year as well, and that would kind of change I feel like direction of the defensive line as well. If they actually got what he's capable of instead of, him being a little inconsistent. Jerry Jones is a weird owner. Yeah. I think you're saying weird. I'm just gonna say bad. but but yeah. If the Steelers keep 5 tight ends, yeah. See, that's the thing. I mean, maybe they trim at receiver. Because you think about all these like borderline wide receiver 4s that they've kind of collected on the roster. Do you really need all of those guys if you've got, because Pat's going to play some in the slot. Some of the stuff where they do look to spread teams out, like Pat's gonna line up all over the place. So that's going to take away some of the slot reps from other people that would be available to them in a different system or anything like that. What's good, Chris? So I think receiver is a potential spot. I'm not really sure where else like that makes a ton of sense for me. But yeah, the last thing that I kind of just want to hit on, like at least acknowledge, they gave Justin Fields reps with the starters yesterday on the last day of practice. I thought that was kind of interesting. Get him a little bit more exposure to, running with the first team. I definitely think that that's a good thing. I think that it's Russ's show. I think that Russ is gonna be the starter come week 1. But I like the idea of providing as much competition as possible. Roll the ball out, see which 2 of these guys gives you the best chance to win. But I think getting Justin acclimated to the system is a good thing as well. So I appreciate you guys for tapping in with me. 65 people on a random Friday with no notice. I apologize for the short notice. Just please, y'all do me a favor. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, all that good stuff. We crossed the 7,000 sub mark recently over the past, I think, couple weeks. The road to 8K, begins here. I'm excited about, there is going to be some dead period over the next couple of weeks. I probably won't go live as much on Fridays, but I will still have content up on the channel. We'll probably still just do we're going to do a lot of X's and O's type film room type stuff. I've already got some ideas in terms of what we're gonna cut out. So I'm excited for you guys to see that stuff. And then, I am going to be there at training camp in Latrobe. So at least for a handful of days, like hopefully like 3, 4 days or whatever, I'm going to be there in person. So I'll be able to give you guys some, in person takeaways. I'm excited about that. Excited about seeing, the team really for like the first time in person. So if you're going to training camp, be sure, I'll remind you guys when I end up heading out there. But if you're going to training camp, definitely would love to chat. Y'all hit me up. Let me know what days you're going to be there, and I will keep you guys informed on when I'm going to be up there as well. So, as always, I appreciate you guys. Y'all have a good rest of your day. Enjoy the weekend.